Okay, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today we are graced with the presence of Johnson Chong. Oh my gosh, sorry about that. Johnson is an award-winning author of Sage Sapien from Karma to Dharma. Did I pronounce that right, Johnson?
Okay. Yes.
Good. Johnson has lived in 3 different continents, now based in Sydney, Australia, and he helps with high bar leaders break through their mental and emotional obstacles so that they can have more inner peace and fulfillment. And he does this through unconventional spiritual coaching. So thanks for being here today, Johnson. I'm super curious to hear about what you've got to say, seeing as we've been conversing a little bit in the Instagram DMs. And for those of you that are listening, or listen to the replay or listen to the podcast, Johnson and I actually connected through a speaking gig that we were supposed to do in Sydney, but that's fallen through because of COVID. So it just goes to show it's amazing who you can connect with, you know, on social media and also through podcasting, this, that, and the other. So thanks for being here, Johnson. Is there anything that I've missed there? Anything you want to add?
No, thanks so much for the introduction and thanks for having me on your show.
Perfect. Thank you. So for those that are listening or watching, I basically was talking to Johnson about chakras and the voice and throat chakra. So it's something that I've been wanting to look into for a little while now, but just hadn't quite gotten around to it. And with Johnson's spiritual background, he seems to be a bit of a wizard with this sort of stuff. So Johnson, can you share with us, you know, for my listeners that may not be that spiritual or woo-woo yet, I know I'm only, you know, relatively early on my journey. It's only been a couple of years since I realized I was spiritual and not religious. So can you actually explain what chakras are for those that don't know what the heck I'm talking about right now?
Sure. And yeah, I'm very happy to go very woo-woo and then make it more science-based as well. So don't worry about that. And I think you're right in the distinction between spiritual and religious. We have to notice what is our personal relationship to the universe, to life, our purpose, what inspires us. And then there's, of course, man-made rules and dogma that kind of creates religion. But really at the essence of all religion is this understanding that there's an unseen energy that's driving us. And that's really what the chakras are. The chakras are, think of them as power centers that are informing the physical, biological experience that we're having. So for example, the root chakra, which lives at your perineum, so kind of the space between your pubic bone and your tailbone.
Yep.
Anatomy is different for both men and women, but it's relatively around there, and it governs your grounding, your ability to connect to the earth, your sense of safety. So if you have insecurity around money or abandonment or anything family related in your childhood, whether it's sexual safety to feel free to express your sexual identity, or the safety to just be who you are. It doesn't even have to be themed around sex, but that very much is your first chakra.
I have to say that's really interesting, Johnson, around, sorry guys, it's a little bit off topic in terms of talking about the perineum, but it's all relative. Being a midwife, we always talk about the perineum. It's like basically like one of the centered things that we do in our line of work, and we just call it the peri. Like, it's quite funny because in hospital we just say, have you checked that lady's peri? Like, you know, without getting too graphic, all this sort of stuff that you have to do in healthcare. So it's really interesting that the chakra, the first one, begins at that point for everybody, man, woman, everything in between.
Yeah, and it also vibrates at a certain color. So this doctor, this quantum biophysicist named Dr. Alfred Fritz Popp, back in the 70s, he designed a machine that was able to measure the colors that were emanating. And what these machines found was that everything, all of our cells, have light trapped within the DNA helix. So when you broke apart the DNA, there was light, there were photons. And This was part of the cancer research that he was working on to figure out how to use certain frequencies to recalibrate the body's natural healing capabilities. And the ancient people knew this all along, that the body emitted light. It was just science, of course, goes in that very left brain. How do we prove it? We want to see it. And of course, lo and behold, there are devices out there that measure the light. It's sometimes you hear it called as an aura, right? Yeah. So the root chakra vibrates at red, and then you get up to the sacral, the solar plexus, you get up to the heart center, and then fifth chakra is the throat, right? So that's kind of what you wanted to focus on the voice. How do we speak? How do we stand up for what we believe in? And also, why do people sometimes lose their voice? And then you have the third eye, which is about intuition and your dreams. And then you have your crown chakra, which really is your connection to God or universe or whatever you want to call that energy that made you.
Wow.
And those are the 7 chakras that govern your physical experience. And all of those chakras, you cannot see them, but they're there. They inform what your organs are doing, how enzymes are communicating. So if there's, let's just say high energy, low energy. If you have lots of energy, energy is moving. Things are moving through your chemistry, enzymes are moving properly, and you feel vital. And if you're feeling sluggish or diseased, if you have an autoimmune or anything like that, that takes away from your vitality, then the chakras are not spinning, right? They're blocked. So in the energetic world, we're looking at high or low energy, somewhere in between. Is it inflamed? And what's causing it? And so in energetic medicine, so Reiki healers, shamanic practitioners, people that work with even bioresonance energy medicine, we're looking at the invisible before we go into the physical. And in Western allopathic medicine, the treatment tends to go from the physical first. So you drug someone up. So let's affect change in the chemicals to get rid of the symptoms. And in energy medicine, we're more interested in looking at what the belief systems are, what kind of trauma and stories are being fed from your mind into your body that is causing the physical manifestation of disease. And if we can get to the root of that, then you're creating the conditions for optimal health. And you don't necessarily treat the disease, you're treating the environment, which is your body, your mind, your spirit, and then the disease just goes away.
Yeah.
And that's really how you approach it from a more holistic point of view.
Amazing. So there's actually 3 things that came up for me when I was listening to you talk about that. So the first one is most people would have probably seen, if they're into any sort of spiritual, energetic sort of work, they see the images of the chakras down the spine, I guess you'd say, in a linear fashion with different colors and different areas for each chakra. The interesting thing that I think is they're spinning. So if they're blocked, there's something wrong and there's dis-ease somewhere in the body or the mind. But also I was having a conversation this morning recently with a coaching friend of mine who recently, well, not that recently, but broke her left wrist. And according to Louise Hay, who has the whole symptom list around what is underlying that and all this sort of stuff, the spiritual reason for it, it was about rigidity and not being fluid and flexible. And she was actually saying, I've been taking on way too much in my business. I haven't been delegating stuff. I haven't been flexible. I've been very rigid. And it was quite interesting because she's I knew something like this was going to happen in my body. She's I just didn't know what and when. And so it was really fascinating that was something that came up for her, because as soon as she fixed that, the wrist stuff has started to improve and started to go away.
So she had wrist pain?
I think she actually broke her wrist. Or fractured her wrist or something like that. Yeah.
I have a similar story with my knee and my ankle and also my hip.
Oh, feel free to share. That's a lot of body parts.
I've broken a lot of things. And so the energy of bones, if you think about it from a very intuitive point of view, your bones are your foundation. So just like the trunk of a tree holds the tree, and then there's the roots that you can't quite see. And so our bones are like that. They're the roots of our tree. And if something is imbalanced in our foundation, then it can mean maybe we're overperforming, or we're not taking care of the environment, or there's many reasons as to why it's imbalanced. And for me, when I tend to overachieve, go into that perfectionist mindset and try to do, but I don't take pause to be. I mean, I'm much better at it now than I was 10 years ago. And that was the time in my 20s, in my mid-20s, when I was breaking everything. I had a sciatic injury in my early 20s from playing the role of the overachiever. I was trained as a theater major, and so I studied acting for theater and film. And in the mornings we would have to do this dance class, and I always want to be front and center and show off and be look at my legs, and I can kick here and there. And so there was this just part of me that wanted to be recognized and to be loved and to be liked a lot, right? And because of that, I pushed my body almost to the point of where I broke it. So
breaking point. Yeah.
Twice, and I was like literally hobbling with my arms, actually. So I guess crawling with my arms off the dance floor when I busted my side. I wasn't warm. I just wanted to show off. And because of that, I hurt myself. So if we look at injuries, not just from this, it's an accident, but there was a mental, emotional reason as to how you're responsible for that. Right? Then we start to look at other things like autoimmune diseases from a different point of view. So in energy medicine, we don't look at physical injuries as accidents. Oh, you got hit by a car. That's an accident. But, you got a parasite. That's a disease. Or you now have Parkinson's. That's a disease. Oh, boo-hoo. So we tend to separate things into two categories in the West. Mm-hmm. But in the East and in indigenous traditions, that's the energy that's there. So you work with the energy. So whether it's something that you brought on yourself that you attracted, or it was something that was caused by a bunch of environmental factors and other things as well, you don't make a distinction between the two. Right. And that's something that we don't like hearing, because when you tell someone, I used to see a lot of clients in Singapore. I lived there for 6 years, and something I noticed was that there was a lot of hyper and hypothyroidism. So Graves' disease, hyper, and the thyroid was just like doing too much, right?
Yeah, and it's all hormonal stuff,
It was just pumping out too much, right? And then the hypo, when the thyroid was not functioning and performing at its optimal, it was underperforming. That was Hashimoto's. I saw more in Singapore in Graves' disease because I tended to work a lot with high-powered women who were, again, this overachiever, having to like prove themselves. Part of it was a generational thing. There was definitely a cultural story there as well, because women in Asia are seen as, it isn't legal, of course, but it is still in the remnants of the culture that it comes from hundreds of years of women as being second-class citizens. And I mean, this goes for in most cultures anyway, right? But very specifically in Asia, there was, if I'm going to be a high-powered businesswoman, I'm going to play the role of what I think power is. And oftentimes it is taking on this overbearing, overly masculine approach, instead of using the soft sensuality, which is innately the gift of a woman. Yeah. And so I saw this a lot in women, and to the point where that some of the women would just like, I don't need the thyroid, I'm just going to remove it and just take
okay.
It was like, I don't need this, it's in my way and it's getting in the way of my efficiency. Yeah. So you can see that there's an emotional correlation among all of these women and their personalities. And then there's this autoimmune, and really autoimmune is just this word in Western medicine that says we don't know what causes it, but it's inflamed and there's some sort of stress around it. And so we're just going to give you some pills and hope that it goes away.
For the best.
Right.
Yeah.
And that unfortunately doesn't work for most people, because they haven't addressed the psychological, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual nature of who they are.
Yeah. And the root issue, they're just kind of band-aiding it, covering it up, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, actually, what I find, interestingly enough, when you're talking about like the high-powered businesswoman or high-powered, corporate woman or whatever the case may be, like one thing I've noticed in my coaching is like it tends to go from one extreme to another quite a lot. So it's either you've got like, especially like the female entrepreneurialism world, it's like it's either hustle, and it's like glorified and romanticized, and like burning out is like the measuring stick of how good you are or how hard you work. Or it goes completely to the other end, where it's like very, very extreme feminine energy, extreme woo-woo, and extreme just like sit there, praying and manifesting anything and everything just to fall into your lap. And it's very passive and very inactive. And so I just find it's really interesting, especially seeing online, there's just two massive extremes. And I know for me, like I've had to work hard to kind of be more in the middle, in like a healthier area. And sometimes I tend to fall more on the hustle side, like get shit done, on the go, high powered, blah, 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 high functioning. And the problem is that our culture does play into that too much, I think, sometimes. And then also the other way, where I've had clients before, like I've taught clients and coached clients the same amount of information, yet one will run with it and be successful and implement everything and sometimes even burn themselves out. And then you've got the other type of client who's like the exact same stuff and they do jack shit with it. You know what I mean? They just sit there expecting clients to pop up out of nowhere and not have to show up online and do all the things. So it's really interesting hearing you talk about like the masculine and the feminine energy.
And yeah, the throat chakra really is in charge of your communication, not just the way you communicate to other people in your relationships, in your business or your personal life, but it's also your inner communication, right? You think about the thyroid's in charge of communicating with the rest of the organs. That's what it does.
Yeah.
When should I be producing, thyroxine? How much? Okay, and then there's a communication between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So there's all these things that are physiologically happening. And if we think about someone who is pushing and trying to force things into fruition, it's like manhandling life, basically. It's like, I'm going to make things happen my way. Controlling. And you can see that in the personality. You can see that in their health. And a lot of the symptoms are fatigue.
Yes. I can relate to all of this. I've worked through a lot of it, but I can still relate to some of it sometimes.
Like, okay, you're fatigued. Okay, so if you think about a person who is spending all their energy on trying to make something look a certain way, then yeah, you're going to get tired. It's quite logical. And then actually, in contrast, in hypothyroidism with Hashimoto's, the symptoms also fatigue. Yeah. You're fatigued because you're not speaking up. And I don't encounter as many people with Hashimoto's. I know a few, and I remember a woman who came to one of my retreats in Greece, and she was very soft-spoken, and everything was just, I'm not going to tell you everything, and I'm just going to keep a little bit of a veneer up and stay away from everyone because I don't want to step on their toes, and I don't want to bother anyone, so I'll just stay in my room. And what was really interesting to watch her during that journey, because our retreat was about gut health, and we also addressed the mental emotional blocks as well as our spiritual connection to life in that retreat. So it was mind, body, and spirit. And then we started mainly from the food first, and what shifted in her was she started to come out of her shell a little bit more, to the point that one day she risked going down this treacherous cliff. We were in the western part of Greece, where a really lush island called Lefkada, and there was nobody but us in this lush villa, but steep, narrow cliffs, like a 30-minute like this down to the secluded beach. And she just disappeared one day, and she just kind of came hobbling back up after lunch. And we're like, where did you go? She's like, I did it. I went down by myself. And it's like, and I'm fine. And that was such a victory for her. And oftentimes when people are not stepping into their power, you find this timidity and this fear of imposing what you want on other people. So you become a people pleaser. You do everything in your power to just make sure other people are okay, but not yourself. And
I can relate to that too. I definitely used to suffer from that.
Yeah. So you think about underactive thyroid. It's underactive in taking care of your own inner communication and what you want. So that's what you said about the middle way. Finding this balance is exactly where we need to be, so that we're not everything in the spiritual journey, whether you're a Buddhist or if you just do your own thing or if you're an extreme yogi, it's about not swinging on this pendulum.
Yes.
You want to get off that ride because it's tiring.
It's exhausting. Well, you end up fatigued either way, don't you? Either under-functioning or over-functioning. And this is something I learned from my coach, and, something that I pass on to my clients too, is like, the under-functioner is also not doing a lot too. So it's like, that's the whole woo-woo, like very passive, very like, I don't like to call it woo-woo because I am a little bit woo-woo, but like fully extreme, not doing enough, if that makes sense, just being and expecting. And then over-functioning, which is what I suffer from sometimes and have to pull into line and self-manage and all that, is like doing too much and reining that in a little bit. So everyone's a little bit different. It's really interesting seeing it in like friends, family, clients, colleagues, all that sort of stuff. And what I found too, interestingly enough, was when I used to work back as a relationship coach in like the space of helping people overcome toxicity and narcissism and breakups and marriages and love and all this, was the most common physical symptoms was either women would actually have a croaky voice or completely lose it for a couple of days. So they couldn't actually physically speak. Tight-chestedness, as well as headaches, migraines. And another big one was, which actually wasn't really, I don't think, when I was working in that space, wasn't discussed enough, and that was the gut. So suffering from like irritable bowel syndrome, gastrointestinal issues, Crohn's disease, all that sort of stuff. And we know that the gut is linked, like the gut brain is linked to the brain and all this other stuff. So can you potentially share some insight around what that is, why that happens, how to maybe overcome that? And I know you probably can't like, you know, address all of that in just like without actually doing a session with someone, but what's your take on that?
Sure. So in Western medicine, there's a lot of why does this happen? Why is the gut brain doing this? Why does this person have these symptoms? And for the most part, if we think about symptoms are pretty much common across the board. You know, you having a migraine or you getting a croaky voice could be from a number of things that are off balance. When we look at it from a spiritual or energetic perspective, we don't care why. It's not important. We just know that there's an imbalance. It might help your psychology or your ego basically to understand why, because you are curious and you want to know. But what's more important is that you get out of the imbalance. And so if you look at, for example, Chinese medicine, they associate each of the main organs with an emotional state that it is in when it is in the positive, and also when it's in its shadow, when it's negative. So for example, the liver, it's responsible for you projecting projects. It's your willpower to move forward in things that you do in your life. And then when you over control and you then get frustrated because it doesn't go the way you want, you get angry. So it's frustration, anger, those are all variations of that. And we want to balance the emotions by taking care of our gut and our organs by eating the right foods. Of course, that's from a physical standpoint, but then also our organs are processing our emotional states as well. In Western science, you can't explain, or no one can really explain even to this day, who communicates with who first in the endocrine system. Does the liver speak to the gallbladder first, or does the stomach speak first, or does the gut speak first? Who decides? And in the quantum world with quantum physicists, what they discovered was that every cell has a biofield or an electromagnetic field of energy around it that is communicating in the subatomic realm first, meaning the energy world, before a biochemical signal is sent. So back in the day when we were in biology class, they taught us that the brain tells the rest of the glands in the body what chemicals to secrete first. But with more recent quantum science, they're discovering that everything happens in the energy spaces before any sort of physical manifestation happens. So if you think of it, subatomic particles, quantum world, energy, invisible, space, emptiness, that first before there's a chain command that goes into your physical body.
So just to interrupt for a second there, just to get on, like to provide an example. So correct me if I'm wrong, is it kind of like this? So just say, you know, you work at a workplace, someone comes into your energetic field with some sort of negative thing, like maybe they've dumped more work on your, you know, desk or something like that. You want to say, actually, no, I've got too much already. Can that be given to such and such? But you don't, you stay suppressed, for example, because you want to people please. Is it that, you know, energetically you're picking up on that and then you have a physical reaction to it? Like maybe your gut pulls in and goes, oh, I don't like that. And then it sends a message to the brain. Is that usually how that sort of cascade plays out if we use like an everyday example?
Sure. That, again, it's the chicken or the egg. We don't know what happens first. And also in the energy world, we don't know what happens first. And it is very much chicken and the egg. It's happening all at once. It's simultaneous. So if, for example, like we use this example and someone comes in and says something to you, but you feel for whatever reason, whether you don't feel good enough or powerful enough to stand up and say no, you can't set your boundaries, a little part of yourself kind of shrinks, and it doesn't feel good that it did that. So for some people, depending on their history of emotional trauma or how they store things in their body, it might be a blockage that then happens in their hip. Some people, it might be in their throat. It just depends on how they're wired, right? Everyone's wired differently. So for the person that's wired in the hip, it might be for them that holding back is more of a repression of their identity. And that energetically is the second chakra, which sits around the sacral and the navel. For someone else, it might be culturally. So for example, I was working or currently working with someone who is of Indian descent. And, you know, me being of Chinese descent, I know that Asian families can suppress like your ability to express yourself.
Yeah.
And this particular person realized that their fear of public speaking and stepping up as someone in the healthcare space, as a leader in the healthcare space, as an author, even, right? Someone who's very much regarded as an expert, but still has issues with presenting themselves publicly. And shies away from that, thinks that, you know, she can't. And energetically, what we found was that there were certain stories or imprints, energetic imprints around her throat that were related to that time in her childhood when she was told, no, you can't speak. You're not allowed to speak. Just sit there and look pretty. Your opinion doesn't matter. And girls should do this. They shouldn't speak up.
Yeah.
So that
and there's also like, if they do be quiet and they are good, then they're called good girls. Oh, she's a good girl. You're good. Being quiet, good. Do you know what I mean? So it reinforces that.
And then you're entrained to, oh, this is good. I'm getting rewarded with compliments and I get nice little presents for being a good girl. Yeah. And for me, I don't give a shit if you're good or bad. Like, I really don't. Like, that is not what I'm about. That's not what spirituality is about. Yeah. And unfortunately, you know, when you were talking about the passive, woo-woo, more feminine type of embodiment of spirituality, that tends to be, I want to go to the light and I want to feel peace all the time. And I just want to meditate and connect to the angels and just sing kumbaya around the fire.
Sounds wonderful.
Great. Sounds wonderful. Fantastic. I'm not judging it. However, it's not realistic. And so
not all the time anyway.
and for me, I actually had to go to that extreme because I, like you, am very much, my mom's really wiry, my dad as well, and it's very much push, push, push. So for me, I had to spend some time in that field for a while where I did nothing. Yeah. I literally would pay to go on retreats to do nothing.
Yeah.
You know, because I was so wired that way. But now I'm in this, I've swung back out of that side of the pendulum and come to the middle. So I'm not saying that's wrong. There's some people that are at that stage of evolution. That's great. So stay there.
Yeah. And they might need that for that period of time. Yeah.
But just know that it's not you're not going to be there forever because you'll never be able to pay the rent. And then you'll go into poverty mentality because you think that anything outside of, you know, the small amount of things that you own is not spiritual anymore. And so that's, again, it's an idea. It's the ego turning into a spiritual ego. And
yeah, I can totally understand and relate to that. Yeah.
You know, and I definitely know people in this kind of space, and it's sometimes difficult to speak to them because they take offense to everything. It's everything. You're just so super sensitive about everything.
And once again, too much of anything is not good for us, right? So
right.
Yeah, like I know what you mean. Like sometimes you can, and different seasons call for different things. Like sometimes needing to be more in your masculine if you're like in a launch phase of your business. But then, you know, when that's over, it's like, okay, cool, let's take a break now, and you swing back into your woo-woo side a little bit. Do you know what I mean? But not to the extreme that, as you said, you're going to poverty because it's like, well, shit, you're not getting anything done in your business or your podcast, but also not doing everything and not ever taking a break. It's kind of like, yeah, not here, but kind of there, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's all about the middle way. I had a woman tell me that they were really, really comfortable in their poverty. I'm like, great, fantastic. Let me ask you a question. Are you using the word poverty to describe simplicity? Because they're not the same thing.
Yeah, like minimalism or something.
Right. And simplicity is pure and honest. And this is exactly what I need versus, oh, I'm in a poverty state, meaning, do you mean that you're now complacent with not having any sort of financial abundance or sustenance.
Yeah.
If that's the case, I want to question why, because if we truly are spiritual, we should be able to create anything we want because we're so tapped into energy, right?
Yeah,
We should
I
be able to
agree.
create the conditions for health, to not have a croaky voice and not lose our voice for no reason. And we should also be able to create the means to manifest our life's purpose and our whether that's your business or you work for an organization as a team leader, whatever it is, it should be material and spiritual and abundant, infinite.
Yes, because I think there's a big misconception about you can't be, and I actually coached a client through this once where they're like, you can't, she's like, I'm scared that if I become successful or earn a lot of money, people will see me as less spiritual and more materialistic. And I'm like, that's a really interesting thought. Do you know what I mean? Because it's all just resources, you know, like money is just freedom units. It just allows you to do what you want with it. And it's a neutral resource. So you can either use it for good, you can use it for bad, quote unquote. So it's like, is this person just settling and they're justifying it to themselves that they're, you know, in poverty and that it's okay and it makes them closer to having a connection to, you know, the greater force or whatever it is that they believe in?
Well, that's all first chakra stuff with money, because first chakra imbalances are all centered around fear. So if someone fears having money, well, most people fear first not having enough money.
Yeah,
right?
that's really common.
Maslowian hierarchy of needs: food, water, shelter. I need money to do that, right?
Yeah.
However, when it flips and it goes, oh, I'm going to fear having too much money, that becomes a sixth chakra thing. And the imbalance of the sixth chakra, the third eye, is disillusionment, because now we're operating from a place of, I have an idea of what something should be. I have an idea of peace. I have an idea of spirituality, and it looks like that. And if I upset that, then I'm going to create the conditions for chaos. And so then they start to override the other chakral needs, right? So the energy of first chakra is like, yeah, I need money. I need to pay for, I need a house to live in, so the wind doesn't like knock me down, right? So, but if the head starts over operating, then you have an imbalance up here, and then the other chakras start to spin counterclockwise. That's when it's off balance, and then this thing is only spinning, and it's like, okay. So sometimes, you know, even though first chakra is around money, you know, you can have an imbalance in a different chakra that then causes you to still feel that thing you have concerning money. So it's interesting how the chakras work, because sometimes symptomatically or from the outside, it appears as if you might have very similar energetic blocks as another person, but the root is not the same. So some people prescribe to past lives. So, you know, and I don't want to get into the whole thing of whether past lives are real or not, but for me, I look at them as archetypal stories that are playing out in someone's psyche. So if someone really believes, for example, I had a woman who really believed she was this Egyptian goddess at one point.
That's a great past life to have if that is the case.
Great. I wish I was an Egyptian goddess. Do I actually have dreams where I was an Egyptian goddess, having this traumatic experience of figuring out who I want to be and who I should be, and then not following through, and then reincarnating in this lifetime thousands of years later? No, I don't have those kinds of experiences. I've had a little bit more human experiences, but this was a really big, fantastical experience, and this person believed it to be true. And so for me, it's not so important if someone knows or confirms if that past life remembrance is a historical fact. It's more important that they believe it. So energetically, the themes of that story are playing out in the way that they're living their life now. So that energetically, that past life remembrance lives in the chakras as well. It lives in the field, because it's all stories. Stories are imprints. Imprints are energetic. They're little cookie crumbs, and they affect the way that your body works. And so we need to decide which imprints to clear and which ones to keep, because some stories are super useful. Like, for example, don't go near the hot stove. You know, everyone's done that. You touch it and you burn your fingers. So don't do that. You're going to hurt yourself. And then there are other stories like, oh, you're not good enough. Your opinion is not worth it. And so just keep quiet and try not to disrupt the peace, and don't be such a bother. Like these types of conditioned patterns. Some people call them patterns, behaviors, programs, energy, imprints. They're all the same. It affects these fields around all of these cells, which then talk to your body, and your body goes, oh yeah, that's you're not fully optimizing who you are, so let me just put it in here and make this organ inflamed, and then now you have like disease. That's kind of simplistically looking at it, but energetically that's what will happen over the course of because energy, we know, doesn't ever get destroyed, it just gets transformed. This is physics 101. So what happens to all the negative self-talk and the emotional repression? Where does that go?
Yeah, where does it go?
Your organs. It goes to your organs, and you inflame, and then you get an autoimmune, or you break a bone. That's how I broke my knee trampolining, because I thought I needed it to do, right? So it was on a day that was cloudy, it was rainy, and really everything in my environment said, stay home and rest, do nothing. But again, my brain took over. So I gathered 2 friends, and we had a competition on how many like trampolines we could jump over. And then I broke my knee. So some people go, oh, boo-hoo, Johnson, you had an accident. But energetically, I knew that it was more than that. It was more than that. This was a sign, right, from the powers that be to show me that you see what happens when you push too much. And I've had to learn a lot through making many, many mistakes and hurting myself. And in some cases with other people, unfortunately, they experience more tragic things and autoimmune things. For me, it's more been like breaking bones, but it's still an injury. It's still you not being optimal.
Absolutely. So. Well, I've never personally broken a bone, so knock on wood. Hopefully it stays that way for a while. But interestingly, like it took me ages to realize. So for me, my background was I was working as a full-time shift worker years ago for a long amount of time. And I remember like the first year out of uni into full-time shift work, I was getting sick all the time. All the time, always getting lethargic, catching colds, catching flus, needing to use my mental health days because I just couldn't face going back into that environment because I didn't know how to manage myself or my energy, or, I couldn't speak up at work either. Like I was, in healthcare, it can be seen as like, like they eat their young sort of thing. It's like when you're young, you've got to really earn your stripes and prove your worth. And, anyway, it's a long story. So for the first couple of years of working life, I was like, always bloody sick, always had, and as you get sick with one thing, it's like your immunity is low, so you're more prone to catching another thing because the deep-seated thing hasn't actually been fixed or worked through. So I'd get better enough to be like, yeah, I'm not sick enough to take another day off, so I'll go back to work. Never had addressed the issue, and then kept getting sick and sick. And then I remember one time I actually got in trouble for taking too much sick leave, and then I wasn't getting paid for it. And that's when I was like, okay, there's something seriously wrong here, and something seriously wrong with this. And now that I don't work full-time anymore, thank God, and I don't ever want to have to again for someone else, like my quality of life is so much better. My health is so much better. But interestingly enough, and most of my audience knows this from my very first podcast with narcissistic relationships and stuff. So for me, I actually developed irritable bowel syndrome through that relationship where I was constantly having pain and bloating, and I couldn't stop burping. I know that sounds really awful and horrible to talk about, but hey, speaking my truth right here, And it was interesting because it hasn't been until relatively recently where I've learned about human design and how my sacral center, for me being a manifesting generator, is like, I don't know much about it yet. I know the basics, I think, but like my sacral center is like massively linked to my human design or something. Yeah. And most often, like, it's interesting because when I have a reaction to something, it's always in the gut. That's the first place in my body it hits. And so if something feels wrong or off, even if I haven't had time for my brain to catch up and think through it, it's like I know now when something's wrong. Like I can feel it. And then I've got to sit there and I've got to go, okay, Olivia, what do you need right now? What is this about? Why do I feel this way? What's going on? I've actually got to have like a gut check with myself to figure out what the hell is going on sometimes.
Yeah. So for the human design, which has 5 basic energy types, manifesting generators and generators are connected to their sacral input, which means that is the source of most of your energy. It's kind of like your cell tower. This is where all your energy
thought of it like that. That's cool.
For me, I'm a manifester, and so I don't have a sacral input, which means that I live up here a lot. and then the way that, and then also you have 9 centers, and the centers are either defined or not defined, which means that they're either very fixed in the way that they process information, your thoughts, your emotions, or they're undefined, meaning that they're very open to the way that other people around you, they might affect the way you process information, types of feelings you might have. So someone with, let's say, an undefined heart center might feel things, like empaths have this, they start to feel things that are not necessarily their own. Whereas someone who has a defined one will have a very set way of feeling their feelings.
Yes.
Right. So with me, because my sacral is open and it's undefined, and this goes for projectors as well and reflectors, we sometimes, if we get swept up too much by the crowd, we can start to get sucked into the hype, right? But also at the same time, I need that in order to function. I need the group energy to command projects and whatnot. So we have to kind of know where our energy tends to gravitate towards, where it starts and originates from, and where it moves towards. For me, it's a top-down approach. How I do things is very much, I get inspired, information happens here, and then it kind of funnels down through the rest of my body, and my body starts to feel something, and then I have an emotion. My emotions go, oh, okay, this is, my emotions come last. For other people that are more the other way, from the bottom up, from their sacral first, you ask them a question. Hey, Olivia, do you want to create a podcast about hyper and hypothyroidism with me? And we'll call it Hashimoto's. You would sit there and go, right? And so that is coming from the emotional and from the sacral. And energetically, you would go from the bottom up, and that's how you would make your decisions. You would feel it, have an emotion, and that emotion will inform you yes or no, and then you would go and do something about it. Right? For me, it's the other way around. I go thought down into emotions last. And so some people are always trying to feel more, but sometimes this is not how you're wired. So go thought and then eventually feel. And some people are trying to rationalize more. And when you understand your design, then you start to appreciate how other people process things. Because I know that I love working with people that are more top down, and then in between too. Then the bottom up, there's then something in between as well, right? A mix of all of it. But it's very hard for me to work with people that are very in their emotional field. For me, it gets very taxing and draining. So I tend not to work with these types of people because it drains me.
Yes. Well, so, I have to say, like, for me, I don't think I'm fully that way. Like, it's hard to explain, actually, because when I think about it, it's like I get asked a question or something happens, I have a gut reaction to it. I try to, it's funny because sometimes I'll ignore it or think, or, distract myself from it, but it doesn't go away. And then I'm like, okay, what is this? And then I try to rationalize it and go, okay. And I try and fit it into logic. And sometimes I feel like it starts in the gut, it goes up to the brain, and then there's sometimes I can't rationalize it. So I've got to go back to the gut to be like, okay, is this really a good feeling or a bad feeling? What's going on? And then I go back up to the brain. And so what I find in my coaching is I love learning about how to conceptualize stuff and, consciously understand the reasoning and the logic. Like when I can pick it apart like that, it all makes sense. That's why I love coaching models, because it's like they layer it with logic, not just the emotion. So you can understand it better. And I think that's how I work best. I love that.
I mean, we're talking about human design very generically, of course, and there's 64 gates and possibilities of how energy can move. And so for sure, you're not just all one or the other. So, yeah. Yeah,
varying degrees of how it all plays out. So, so I'm curious then around, so in terms of like the throat chakra. So firstly, actually, before we get into that, when you're talking about the spinning chakras and some going some way and others going the other, can that happen? Like you might have a couple that go clockwise, a couple that go anti-clockwise. And if that's the case, so when someone comes to you, how do you know that their chakras are blocked or that they're spinning one way or the other? Is that too hard to answer?
So I'm just trained to sense it, so I can see it. So I can talk about it from various perspectives.
Okay.
In the shamanic tradition, you look at things from 4 levels of consciousness.
Right.
You have the physical perspective, and that's governed by an energetic archetype of the serpent. And in this perspective, we're looking at the physicality. So it will look a certain way. for example, if someone comes in and they're hunched over and their throat is closed and they have this shy nature about them, right? This happens a lot in tall people.
Yes. Oh, I relate to that. I'm 6'2", so I don't like to, because I'm actually, it's funny, like even though I'm more on the hustle side, I'm actually quite feminine, and I hate to feel like I'm towering over people and intimidating them. So subconsciously sometimes, and I've got to remind myself not to do this because you can end up with back and shoulder problems, to come down to their level, I guess, to make them feel more secure and comfortable around me, I hunch. And I've got to remember, no, that's not a good look, and, at the end of the day, like, I think if you are holding yourself confidently, people respect that. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to get intimidated. Do you know what I mean? So I definitely can relate to that.
And so, yeah, and you just kind of highlighted a lot of the mental, emotional thoughts that go on in your mind to affect a physical change in your posture. So
Yeah.
that's the first level that we look at. So if there's an imbalance off the throat chakra and off of the heart chakra, then most likely some sort of physical postural change might happen, or it could be, for example, that tightness you said across the chest. There could be a joint injury somewhere from the arm bone, the connection to the shoulder. There's a physical sign. And then the second level, which you kind of also highlighted in describing why that may happen in that hunched forward position, is the mental emotional. And that is typically the story that we tell ourselves about why we do things the way we do. That's why I stand like that. I want to make sure people are comfortable with me. I don't want to scare them away. I want to be liked. It's like all of that stuff. So I look there first. So I listen to someone, I listen to their story, what they tell me. Right? And then when I have that, then I go, oh, okay, this is giving me some clues. This typically happens during the first 15 minutes of consulting someone new, and you just listen and you absorb and you go, okay, interesting clues. Then when you go into the directions, the other perceptions of the north and the east, which is hummingbird and eagle, we start to play with energy. And that's when you start using your hands to sense things. That's when I start intuiting things from seeing through my inner eye, or I might feel certain things. I might
Like kinesiology, is this sort of in the same realm?
Well, I'm not a kinesiologist, and I've never had a kinesiology session, so I don't know. But it is, I might get an image or an understanding or feeling. It's something that is beyond my senses. It's just something I know.
Yeah.
Or it might translate into my body as physical heat, hot, cold. It might appear a certain way. So for example, I'll use this example. This happens a lot because I work with a lot of women.
Yeah, please do. The more examples, the better. Part of me wants to go, what do you sense from me? What's your knowing?
Well, I'm not working on you right now, so I'm not going to invade your privacy and just start looking. But that would be rude. But oftentimes I find around the womb a dagger or a spear or some object that's embedded in there from a certain time and place. And some of it is energetic and just a symbol, and it represents this either restriction off of a woman's sensuality and their freedom to express themselves, their sexuality.
Fascinating.
And some of it is actually, no, someone put it there. And when I remove it, oftentimes the person who is laying there receiving, a whole flood of memories and emotions is happening, and they start to see a memory that they correlate, whether in this lifetime or another lifetime, if they go there, of why that's there. And oftentimes they experience it as pain. So then it's throbbing, and then we pull it out. And I'm not really touching them. I'm just extracting it through the energy field, because the energy field is not on the body. So I'm doing that around the energy field. Sometimes this happens a lot also. So the womb is a big thing, and then around the shoulders and the back of the heart. So if you ever hear the phrase from people like, oh, I feel like they backstabbed me, I was betrayed, right? So oftentimes there's an object that looks like a knife that's kind of pierced in the back, and that manifests in that person physical pain. And so when the knife is extracted, sometimes people feel relieved, and then sometimes people feel sad because that knife spins with them for a very long time. So some of these objects that are embedded in people's energy fields they have a story to it, and people feel that story, as pain. And then when it's being released, they can, if they're sensitive enough, they might be able to be like, whoa, something's wrong, something's missing, or, oh, wow, okay, now I understand why I've been like that all these years. The throat as well, what I've removed around the throat has always been something that is like a clamp or like some sort of chainmail. Those things they put on slaves back, in biblical times, where they chain people and they drag them. And this happens, I see this a lot energetically. And when that's removed, people go, oh, I can breathe again. Oh, wow. Okay. I can now speak. I don't feel afraid to just express my truth and tell my mom, no, I'm 45 now. You don't tell me what to do. Right. So I mean, these are some things that are symbolic, that are universal. You see this a lot in different people. And when you work on people energetically, you see very universal symbols, because it's very much like you go to a cave and you look at ancient hieroglyphs and paintings. There's always the hand, there's a star figure, there's always a circle, a triangle, a square. All of these symbols speak to the soul, right? Words speak to the mind. And
there's like some great quotes you got right there.
and before men even began writing, they were drawing symbols on caves.
Yeah.
And so to speak to the soul and our energetic experience, energy work happens in symbols. So I don't get like someone telling me like, no one's talking to me. It's a whole story that's playing out, kind of like a silent film going on in my head, and also sometimes in my body. Sometimes I'll feel things, I'll get sharp pains every now and again. So this is kind of how you work energetically, and different practitioners feel things differently. But what's important at the end of the day is that the recipient, the client, feels it and then is able to process it as something useful for them to take action on in this life. Because if not, then it's just, oh, great, you just had a wonderful energetic experience, but you didn't do anything about it. And then that pattern, that knife behind the back, will come back.
Yeah. It makes total sense. It's kind of like learning something, or going to a convention or a conference or something, learning something, but not doing anything about it, not acting on it, not implementing it. So it's kind of like forgotten about and, never kind of comes to fruition. So it's really interesting that you say that. The reason why I like to focus on the throat chakra is because, like, for me, I think I've lost my voice like once or twice in my lifetime. So physiologically lost it from being sick or ill or something. But for me, like, as you were talking, it resonates because, like, I love my parents very much and they did the best that they could. And I'd say this to their face, so it's nothing offensive to them. But, as kids, I was always like the good girl growing up. I was a little bit bossy to my brother, but I was always like, if I was told to be quiet, I would be quiet, and that's how I knew that I was being good. That's how I'd get love and attention, and I'd feel safe and all this sort of stuff. So it was kind of like when the adults got together at like a dinner party, it was like, it's adult time now, you kids go away, watch a movie, whatever, just either be quiet or don't be around, sort of thing. And so I grew up used to that, you know what I mean? And then I learned through high school that if you're not the one that makes a fool of yourself in the classroom, you can, slide under the radar, so to speak. You can't be embarrassed or humiliated or whatever because you're not, saying teacher and then saying something stupid or silly, right? Or that can be judged or criticized. And then naturally, like, it all makes sense when you look back on this now. It's like, of course I'd get into a toxic relationship where, it wasn't safe to express what you wanted or how you felt or what your needs were. And so it's interesting because it all kind of lines up, you know what I mean? Like the story, the milestones, all the experiences. And so for me, that's what I've been working through a lot, probably since 2016 or 17, and I think that's like an underlying theme with, my listeners and my clients, is actually having a voice, speaking up, speaking out. Because a lot of my women clients are quite scared of showing up online, and sharing their message, showing their face. There's always that fear of judgment, that others are going to judge them or tell them that they're wrong. Like I had a client recently who her whole business is around a plant-based lifestyle. She's scared to show up on social media because people criticize, her theories around plant-based life stuff. So she's, not making as much money as what she'd like. She's scared to show up because of that judgment. So it's really interesting to see how that plays out, because I feel like, and I know a lot of people struggle with the idea of starting a podcast because it's that underlying fear of like not being good enough, fear of speaking out, speaking up, getting in trouble even as adults. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I for sure understand that because I've been through that as well. coming from a theater background, I used to think I had my first panic attacks when I was in theater conservatory because I thought that I didn't do well. And those, ironically, would be the shows that people would congratulate me on, the ones where I would have a panic attack backstage.
Oh.
And so I started to slowly realize that my perception around things was not actually what was actually happening. And I had this aha moment. It didn't happen right away. It took some time before I realized, wait a minute, you're delusional, because this pressure that you're putting on yourself is just not necessary. And
Yeah.
I went the long way around, and it required a lot of emotional, mental, like, kind of breaking points. And I used to, at the end of yoga classes, I would just start crying, not because I was thinking about any sad thoughts, but my body was going through this emotional release of letting go of all the times that I ever felt not good enough, or not heard, not seen, not important enough, because I came from a family, again, that really put me down. Like, my parents were physically, verbally, mentally, emotionally abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, I had to hide a lot. And so my body was releasing that trauma, and it just happened to be crying at the end of yoga. And in energy medicine, which is quicker, because I went the yogic way first. I started as a yogi, and the yogic path is very much the path of discipline and observation. So you observe something enough, you will understand that this is not the way to go. Right. And it's all through observation. Mm-hmm. But again, it's using the mind to affect change in the mind, emotions, in the body, which takes a longer time. You may have to do it 10,000 times before you have any sort of significant changes. With energy, it shifts more quickly because you're working at the subatomic level. And we all know that if you're affecting the change in the cellular structure of the energy that created the cells, then that informs the physical expression of it. Mm-hmm. It's just what happens. You see this in like the 2% spontaneous remissions with, if you ever read the book Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani, she had stage 4 lymphoma. She has a near-death experience. She basically dies, leaves her body, has this whole dreamlike experience where she knows everybody's name in the operating table, and she can see that her body is there, and she knows the name of the doctor, she knows all the nurse attendants and all of this stuff that's going on, but yet she's knocked out on drugs. Her physical body is. And what was really surprising to the medical staff when she came back, 36, 48 hours later, out of this intense near-death procedure, she knew exactly what was happening, and the doctors were confused. Like, how could you know that? Because we knocked you out. And she said, oh yeah, I saw it all. Like, my consciousness came out and I saw everything. And it was in this near-death experience that she had to make amends with all of her belief systems that she held about I'm not good enough. It's the same inner critic stuff. I wasn't loved, and my parents hated me, and it's, maybe that's true, maybe it's not true, but it's how that story lives in you, right? So she had to make peace with that, came back, decided, no, I'm going to live, step back into her body, and then all the lesions on her skin and all of this stuff that normally would take a very long time to heal, it just, in a matter of a few weeks, she was back to full health. And people were like, what happened? Where didn't you have stage 4 lymphoma? Weren't you supposed to die? And so this stuff happens when you address things from the energetic. And of course, we want to do this before we get something very serious, right?
Yeah.
So how you deal with the energy is partly psychological. You look at the mental, emotional, and you coach it and you understand it. But then the other aspect is, no, there's an imprint there around your throat. We need to remove it. So let's go, just like you would go do surgery for, if you herniated your discs and you fell off a mountain and you snapped your spine or something and you need a rod. Yeah, like you need surgery, right? But in the same way you need physical surgery, there's also energetic surgery that needs to happen. So like for me, it was a slower route because I went the whole mental, emotional observing path until I discovered, the shamanic path 5 years ago, where they were addressing just the energy. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay, interesting.
It's kind of like a shortcut in a way, because it's like doing like the 10,000 hours of having to observe and do all that extra hard work. It's like you can clear out the energy stuff first, and then
Exactly.
the
It's
clean.
like the how many mantras do you have to chant? And if you go and do mantra work and affirmations, they say 180,000 times in 1 year. That's a lot.
It's a
I
lot.
might forget. I have to
A lot
set
of
my timer.
times.
It's a lot of times. It's like, okay, great. That works. It definitely works. People who have done that, it works. So if that's you, you want to do that in a year, fantastic. Go do that. You know, energy medicine, it's much quicker. I was working with someone who has been on antidepressants for a very long time. Now, I don't treat disease. I don't address disease. I work with health. So in mind, body, and spirit. And this person literally just stopped taking their antidepressants, not because I told him to or whatever it was. It just was the stories and the energetic cords and attachments around the conditions for that. They changed. So he no longer needed it. And this was something he was working with his psychologist on, or psychiatrist on, reducing the dosage, and that he eventually was supposed to come off of it. But this was a byproduct of focusing on creating the energy that's moving more towards life purpose than just fixating your energy around the diagnosis of, oh, this is the illness, this is the disease. So that's kind of how we have to look at like these things with people feeling afraid to speak out, right? Okay, great. You're afraid of receiving criticism. Why? I want to know why. So we go back and we see. And then we start to notice that, oh, wait, it was that time when I was 4 and I forgot about it and da, 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 da. And then you work on completely rescripting that program. It's like a computer with a virus. You know there's a virus. You know, like you need to speak out, but you won't. So you got to do something. You got to get Norton's antivirus security software, or whatever it is. I don't know, but you got to do them. You know?
Yeah, like it's funny too, because like, you know, I think it's really interesting because like as a really little girl, apparently I was quite bossy, which is interesting because I don't really relate to that now. But what's interesting too is like, you know that I think like societal, it doesn't happen to everyone, of course, but this was my experience. It was kind of like if something was wrong in a relationship, for example, it's typical sometimes for the woman to go, it's nothing, don't worry about it, whatever, it's fine, you know, and they lie to themselves and then they lie to their partner because there is something wrong, there is a problem. What I found was I got better at not doing that, you know, my old version of myself in that toxic relationship. And then it wasn't until like I got better at like opening up and being like, oh, okay, I can actually discuss something that's wrong or something that I wanted. But like the way that it was communicated was so childlike. Do you know what I mean? When you're in your early, I think it was like late teens, early 20s, you know, and not having parents that communicated very effectively, I thought that was normal, you know, to have your partner ask you 10 times, what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong? And you're like, nothing, don't worry, right? Now I know very, very differently, and my communication strategies are extremely different. But back then, that's what I thought was normal, right? And not only are you lying to yourself, you're lying to your partner. And then when you actually, and what I found was over time, when I did open up to my partner, that's when I would get in trouble, right, from the narcissistic person, because they want to tell you that you're wrong and you shouldn't be feeling that way and it's your fault and blah, blah, blah. And so a lot of that, a lot of those experiences can really stump people unless they resolve that. Do you know what I mean? Like actually like reprogram their brain. But what you're talking about is actually energetically clearing stuff first. Is that right? And then you can build from there quicker.
Yes. So when you reprogram the brain, when you say that, my question is, where in the brain? Are you reprogramming the physical brain? It isn't. We're not reprogramming the physical brain. We're reprogramming the programs and the stories that are seemingly carried by the brain. You know, in a lot of the neuroscience talk that everyone's talking about and the NLP and all of this, and they're using a lot of the brain to describe why you need to do something. That's not how it works. It lives in the field. It lives in the energy. It's in the global information field. It's it doesn't live in the brain. Your thoughts don't just live in your brain, because if that were the case, you wouldn't experience psychosomatic discomfort in your body. You wouldn't have phenomena like phantom limbs. Right? The thoughts also live in your body. So you have to address the field around the body as well. You have to address the gut. You have to address all these other things. It's not just neuroscience. It's not just the brain. It's energy medicine. It's the whole, that's holistic. It's the whole thing. You got to look at the
I
whole.
think that's the missing piece for a lot of Western culture. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're so quick to just pop pills or see a psych, and a psychologist is great, but they still once again deal with like the logic, that sort of tracking back, not so much like the energetic stuff. So it's fascinating. And like, I only learnt when I was a life coach that, like what you just said there, the thoughts don't just live in the brain. I had no idea about that. Right? So all the shit that I wasn't dealing with was being trapped in the body by suppressing yourself and being oppressed and not talking up and speaking out and all that sort of stuff. It's all toxicity inside the body. You know what I mean? It stays there. It manifests as disease, illness, comorbidities, all that sort of stuff. So we've probably got to wrap up pretty soon. But what would you say are your top couple of tips for women who have trouble speaking up and speaking out, speaking their truth, that sort of thing? Because as we've talked about throughout this whole conversation, it doesn't just affect you in one area of your life, it affects you in multiple, especially when there's been imprinting as a child, living through childhood, your experiences as a teenager and a young adult, and then an adult and onwards. It affects you, in your business, your career. It affects you in the workplace, in your corporate role, at home, with family, in your relationships, speaking out to your boss or your colleagues. So what would you say to the high achieving, type A personalities that might have a bit of masculine energy going on, but also might be a little bit more woo-woo as well? What would you suggest?
If it's one thing, it's the questioning and redefining of their purpose. And you can think of your purpose in different levels, in different degrees, not levels as in there's better or worse, but in different stages of evolution in how you relate to the universe, to life. And some people have one purpose where they know, like, this is, I'm going to teach school kids till the day I die. This is how I'm going to make a difference. And this is why. And they know very clearly why. Mm-hmm. Some people have multiple purposes and they form various different types of companies. I'm going to go save all of the animals in the ocean by cleaning up the plastics underwater, or whatever it is, to, now I'm going to create a virtual reality company to help people with trauma, or I don't know, whatever it is.
The second one, where it's like, some people are so set on what they know that want to do and be for the rest of their lives. Like, I know this within myself. I'm not someone that could work at one company for like 50 years until I die. I'd like pull my eyes out. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just couldn't do it. So
yeah. And it's coming back to that. It's coming back to the purpose. It's your reason for being. And you need to find out how aligned you are in that reason for doing what you're doing. So if you're working, let's say, a corporate 9-to-5 job, and that's really what you want, you love being part of a larger team, you love their ethos and their larger mission, then great. However, if you are in that organization because you're doing it to please your mom or your dad, or it's something else that is not around truly what you want, then that's probably going to manifest in disease eventually, or some sort of block.
I've seen a lot of people do that. I've even worked with doctors that were like, I never wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be an IT specialist, but my dad said I had to be a doctor. And he paid for my schooling, so I did it. And they end up later with like heart problems and all sorts of depression and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, like, that's so sad. It's like they've cheated.
So that's really the big tip. It's like, whatever it is you're doing, make sure that's what you want to do and not what someone else wants you to do, because there are so many studies around emotional stress and how emotional stress impacts disease. The 5 to 6 big killers that the World Health Organization talks about, like heart disease and diabetes, all these things can be linked back to emotional trauma. And you not doing what you want is emotionally traumatic. It is, because that means you have to spend 50, 60 years being the doctor you never wanted to be.
100%. And you spend a lot of life, doing that.
Yeah. And you swallow it down and you repress it and you get really good at it. And all of a sudden that's how you do everything in life. The way that you treat your lover, your children, your parents, you just don't talk about it.
Yeah. And then if there's a future life, then they've got to work through all the shit that they've been through on this one, doing that. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's all linked up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I think that's my one big tip. And also then to just ask for help and make sure that I had a hard time with this one, asking for help, but now I know that there are things I'm just not good at. So I have to ask for help there. And in the same way, like, if people need help energetically, they need to ask for help, because there's some things that are not logical, but we know that it can be helped. So go more for your personal direct experience of wanting to change versus like, oh, that doesn't make any sense to me, so I'm not going to do it. But do something. You have to move forward. So yeah.
I love that. So if there was, some listeners that heard this conversation and they're like, oh my gosh, I've got physical manifestations here and here, and now I'm starting to realize, oh my gosh, this means more than it just being an ache or a pain or a disease or whatever, and they want to work through that, how do they work with you, Johnson? So where do they find you online? Tell us all the deets.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. It's Johnson Chong if it's Facebook. On Instagram, it's Johnson Chong _Sage Sapien, which is the title of my book. And I'm also online. My website is johnsonchong.com. And I also have this 8-week program called Rebirth. And
Beautiful.
it is online as well. And that's also on my Instagram as a link, but you can also go to johnsonchong.com/rebirth. And in 8 weeks, we do an intensive deep dive into the energetics of the limiting beliefs that keep us stuck in fear, shame, guilt, scarcity, all these things. And we focus on the stories and energetically releasing them. And then everything else starts to unwind itself. You don't have to work so hard on the issues that this is symptomatic issues that you thought were kind of impeding you from living in your truest fulfillment, right? So that's kind of what I'm offering right now. And I look forward to connecting with people. If they have any questions, they can feel free to email me as well. And that's sage@johnsonchong.com. And that's it.
That's cool. So 2 questions. Can they work with you one-on-one, or is it just through your program at the moment?
It's just through the group program right now, because I feel right now that that's the most efficient in terms of, because oftentimes when I worked with people one-on-one in the past, people became really indulgent. And what happens in a group is people learn accountability at the same time while they're learning lessons. And you're learning multiple lessons because you start to see things in other people. And part of the learning is in the mirroring of someone else's behavior and then witnessing that. And you don't really get that one-on-one.
Yeah.
And so
I actually agree with that. I think group programs have so much value that a lot of people, like, I never realized how good they can be. I remember when I signed up to my coach, I was like, I don't care about your group program, just give me the one-to-ones, But the group program, like the amount of value that you can get and like learning other people's life journey. And funnily enough, they tend to mirror what's going on for you. So when there's a lesson for them, there's usually a lesson for you, and you all learn something together and go through a transformation, which is really pretty cool.
Yeah.
And what's your book about?
My book, Sage Sapien From Karma to Dharma, is about rejection to self-love and acceptance. It follows stories from my life, from when I was a kid to going on this journey in acting school, to traveling around the world, to India and meeting different masters and enlightened people who taught me wisdom traditions and lessons on how to live, and then having to apply those lessons in a modern urban lifestyle and failing and then trying again. And it very much is it's a spiritual journey, and it's done in a way that is more story-like, because for me, everything is about the story, right? What kind of stories are we telling? Okay,
cool. And where can they buy your book? Have you got a website?
It's on Amazon. So the link, the title of my book is on my Instagram, and it's also on my website. So it's Sage Sapien : From Karma to Dharma.
Fabulous. There's so many different ways to connect with Johnson. So thank you so much for today, Johnson. Really, really appreciate it. You've definitely given us so many gold nuggets. Even I've learned a fair bit through our conversation together. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful day.
You too.